Hello, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to +921 Heritage Talk 2025 third webinar. I am Marvi Mazhar, architect based in Karachi, who developed this project 3 years ago as a form of response to ongoing deterioration and decay in urban Karachi, where conversation around repair and maintenance is hugely missing. Pakistan Chowk Community Centre is an organization which has worked very hard since 2016 to be an advocate towards built environment, safeguarding public spaces, and establishing a strong stance towards preservation. Pakistan Chowk Community Centre strives to provide a space for community engagement, advancement of arts and culture, and democratic and literary discourse in Karachi's, especially focusing on urban infrastructure and preservation discourse. +921 Heritage Talk is a project of Pakistan Chowk Community Centre, conceptualized and developed in 2023. Every year, PCC hosts these discussions and these webinars dedicated to the politics of heritage and preservation in South Asia. The webinar is later viewed by students, researchers, and urban thinkers on YouTube. Thank you so much again for the speakers to come here and share your work, your practice, because a lot of other people take advantage of such knowledge making. +921 Heritage Talk is an innovative South Asian perspective which unveils radical discussion through yearly student-led curated series on an online platform, bringing different practices together. PCC works hard to bring academics, bloggers, independent researchers, artists, architects, urban planners, policymakers, anthropologists, journalists, and fiction writers to come together to think about development, infrastructure, and ecology. It's my absolute pleasure now to open the third session of +921 Heritage Talks 2025 topic, Post-Colonial Narratives in South Asia. Before any further ado, I now introduce PCC's this year's team who's worked very hard to put this project together. The lead curators are Said Samil and Sana Waheed. Thank you so much again for your absolute hard work. Documentation and coordination, Shaheen Auntie, who's of course lovingly known as Auntie Shaheen amongst all of us, who works really hard in carrying the Heritage Walk Karachi project for students, researchers, and visitors coming from abroad, even friends and family who are regular goers to attend Heritage Walk at a regular basis. Our very own whistleblower from field. We cannot begin without acknowledging this year's dynamic team who worked extremely hard on various sections like research, creativity, social media, and communication strategy. Syed Samil from Karachi University, Sana Waheed from Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, Atsad Zafar, Karachi Grammar School, Ishal Hassan Khan, BNU, Faiz Siddiqui, Karachi Grammar School, Seham Dadaboy, National College of Arts, Asadullah Rajpur, Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, Kissa Ali Jafri, Indus Valley School of Architecture. And all these students for the last 1 month have networked with speakers, have curated the entire 5 sessions, and also dealt with really good drafted emails. I hope all the speakers would appreciate that information was sent out very clearly and very transparently. So I must give credit that the students have done a lot of hard work into putting this together. Before I start the session, just quick SOPs for everyone, especially the audience, our people who are viewing from different space and time right now. I request the audience to keep their mic on mute. If you have any questions, please place it on the chat box. When speakers are finished presenting, we will open the space for audience to interact and share observations. Usually speakers share work for 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes it goes for 5-10 minutes above. Please be patient about it. Our moderator will give a signal when 12 minutes have passed and give another gentle signal around 15th minute. Session is recorded and will be uploaded on PCC YouTube channel. I now welcome moderator Sana Waheed and Ishal Khan to open our first exciting session, which is Decolonization, Post-Independence Art and Architecture in South Asia. On behalf of PCC's advisors and allies who make this happen, I welcome all the speakers who generously carved out their time in different time zones, our audience who believe in our work, and I hope we continue such discussions in future. I thank all my speakers for today's session. It means a lot for you to take out time and share your practice. Over to you, Sana and Ishad.
Thank you, Marvi. Hello, my name is Sana Wahid, and I'm one of the moderators for today's session. We really appreciate you all being here. I will now introduce the brief for today's session on the topic decolonization, post-independence, art and architecture in South Asia. Independence in South Asia, succeeding nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule, brought about a new era of art and architecture in the subcontinent. Interdisciplinary practitioners from newly established states defied the British colonial style and negotiated with their reclaimed South Asian identity. Simultaneously, they engaged with the global art movements such as modernism and internationalism, which resulted in works that merged modernist principles with materials and designs authentic to the South Asian culture. In India, the Progressive Artists Group of Bombay, founded by Francis Newton Sousa, after partition incorporated modernist influences and explored the plurality of their culture. Inspired by PGA in India, progressive artist movement started in West Pakistan, led by prominent artists such as Zubaida Agha and Sadiqain, aiming to modernize art with a shift towards abstraction, use of solid color, and geometric forms. Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, Zainul Abidin and S.M. Sultan's works revolved around themes of social realism. Post colonial Sri Lanka also experienced themes revolving around national and cultural identity and political issues. On the contrary, modernist architecture played a constitutive role in the newly established states. It formed a regional identity and became a means for asserting power. Architects employed concrete as their primary building material and constructed buildings devoid of any ornamentation. Yasmeen, Lari, Mazhar Islam, and Raj Rewal are some of the very well known modernist architects of South Asia. However, the fate of the Hall of Nations, designed by Raj Rewal in India with its demolition in 2017, acts as a precedent to how these structures, once constructed at a very crucial time in the nation's history, are now being neglected by not being classified as a heritage site. This session will focus on the imperative role played by art and architecture in the decolonization of South Asia to understand if they really helped in forming a national identity post-partition, and what role do they continue to play in terms of the current culture and socio-political narratives. I would now like to invite my co-moderator Ishal to please introduce our panel for today's session. Over to you, Ishal.
Thank you, Sana, for the kind introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome such a distinguished panel today. We're truly grateful for our speakers for taking the time to join us and share their valuable insights. Joining us today are Husnain Lotia, Veera Rustomji, Seher Naveed, Saba and Komal Salman. From architects to artists, each bringing fresh perspective on the topic of decolonization of post-independence art and architecture in South Asia. To kick off our session, I am pleased to introduce Husnain Lotia as our keynote speaker for today's session. As his biography details extensively of his experiences, we are only touching upon milestones in this biography. However, if anyone is interested in reading the detailed version, please email us and we will provide it. Husnain Lotia, architect, graduated in 1977 from the National College of Arts, Lahore. He started his career with Bahmani Associates Limited, the office of one of Pakistan's best known first generation architects, the late Tajuddin Bahmani. After a year there in 1979, he joined another premier architect, Habib Fida Ali, and in 4 years there was taken as partner. During his 13 years with Fida Ali, he was in charge of designs as well as significant architectural works. He has also been fairly active in community service, having taught design over several semesters at Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, Karachi, and is a frequent visitor there as an external juror. He has served on various committees for the Pakistan Council of Architects and Town Planners, as well as the Institute of Architects, Pakistan. He is also the co-author of Town Planning and Building Regulations for the City of Karachi, 2000, and an active member of Shehri CBE. Husnain was a core member of the Architects Committee striving for the establishment of Karachi Development and Planning Board for the Sindh government. He also represented the IAP on high-rise building committees for the MPGO Master Plan Group of Offices of City District Government Karachi. He has also led the IAP team to review the Karachi building and town planning regulations, including the comprehensive proposals towards amendments. To start off the session, our lead curator, Syed Samil, will present a visual walkthrough of the early modernist buildings of Karachi, which Mr. Lotia will later address. Thank you, Samil, and thank you, Mr. Lotia, for being here today. Over to you.
Yeah, well, hello everybody. This is I have to confess, this is the first time I'm doing a webinar, and I must thank Marvi and her team because they did a lot of hard work and helped me out a lot to, sort of teach me how these things are done, because I really have no experience. So any goof ups or flops, please forgive me. My background, my bio has already been introduced. So the thing about it is that, the images that you're just going to see are of a great sort of significance to me, because this is my childhood and my teenage years and my, my youth. These are the buildings, this is the architecture that I grew up with. And this thing will start around the late 1940s, the images you'll see, and they'll end around early 80s, before any of you were born. So that is the Karachi that I grew up with. Yeah, okay, so this is Mohammadi House. No, I beg your pardon. This is Kandawala building on M.A. Jinnah Road and Abdurrah Harun Road, actually Zebun Nusar Street. And then, the Garden Road which takes you to the zoo. And this is a lot of premier sort of corporate offices were in this building, including the IBA. Yeah, yeah. So the first campus of IBA was in this building. This is Mohammadi House on Chaudhrygarh Road, also a very prominent building of its time in the late 1940s, early 50s. One thing I must mention, that we have Veera Rustomji with us. Her grandfather, the late Mr. Rustomji, worked as assistant architect with a very premier firm called Daruwala and Company, who did a lot of these buildings that you're going to see. Although Mr. Daruwala was actually an engineer, not an architect, but in those days, engineers did some great work, fabulous work. So Metropole Hotel, I think, is also Mr. Daruwala, although I'm not totally sure. And then this is the Beach Luxury Hotel, which is again Daruwala, and the Columbus Hotel. Now this is a little later than Beach Luxury, and you can see more of a very Bauhaus sort of, Walter Gropius influence. Then PIDC, also Mr. Daruwala, and Khamar House. This fabulous building on Chaudhrygarh Road was done by Kamaruddin. His son is also a famous and very well-known architect, Amir Ali Khamar. This was done by his father as a commercial building. State Bank of Pakistan, they had a in-house architect called Richie. I think he was British or American British. And Ijaz Ahad's father, Ahad Saab, was assistant architect with him. And this was built around 1960s, maybe mid-60s. I am not sure. Pearl Continental. This building was completed, I remember this. This again mid-1960s to late 1960s. This was an American architect called William Tabler who designed this building. Sorry, just you go back. And we used to call it a pinjara or something, or murgi khana, because the whole thing was completely screened with precast concrete jali block. Next. Then this building came and radically changed everything. This is obviously Habib Bank Plaza by Leo Daly of San Francisco. And this was, I think, completed in 1972 or 1973. But as you can see, it is international style, modern, yet not quite a lot of brutalism. It sort of bewildered everybody because you couldn't find a convenient label to slot this in. It was so different. Fabulous building. Even today, it's so great. Then, of course, this is, I think, Stock Exchange now. MCB. Okay, this is also in Chaudhrygarh Road, the original MCB building. And you can see Habib Bank Plaza in the background. National Bank of Pakistan, I think this was Surti Tharyani. I'm not sure, but a nice building. State Bank again with the National Bank. And this This building is very interesting. I've been trying to find out who the architect was, but I can't find it. This is the National Museum in Burns Garden, across from Shine Complex. And it's very interesting, very nice building. And I've been trying to find out, but I think somebody told me that it was done by the museum administration themselves. They got hold of an engineer or two from the PWD, the Public Works Department, and they did it, but I may be wrong. It's a very nice building. You should go and see it if you haven't seen it. Tibet Center. This is the era of another one of the great architectural firms who did tremendous amount of work in all over Pakistan from the mid 60s to they're still doing, but the two brothers called Naqvi and Siddiqui, sorry, not brothers, partners, Naqvi and Siddiqui. And this building is Tibet Center on Bandar Road, M.A. Jinnah Road. I don't know if you've seen it. The ground floor is now an auto spare parts market. But this building is very interesting because the upper floors are all corporate offices, most of them belonging to the sponsors, the owners of the building. And it's, the whole building is centrally air conditioned with fan coil units under the windowsills. Very, very interesting building. And the finishes and the materials that are used in this building, I had the good fortune to go and visit it a long, long time ago. And it had the main doors that lead you from the lift lobby into the office space were glass doors and with handles that were custom made for the building, solid brass handles and lots of other details. Very small ceramic mosaic in the lift lobbies, really worth seeing. In those days, firms like Naqvi Siddiqui, Tajuddin Bhamani, Surti Thariani, one thing that they understood in my opinion, even better than us now, was the quality and the usage of materials. How materials are used, how they work, how you can get good quality. In this context, if you ever have the opportunity to go to Lahore and visit the old houses in Gulberg, there was an architect called Chishti Saab, and he used to do these fantastic things. They used to do things with terrazzo I can't do today. So, try and visit these buildings if you guys can, and you learn a lot, especially architects. Next. This, of course, is Karachi University by Mikhail Ikoshad, and these are some very, very interesting buildings. Again, the Memusan Library, very Corbusiesque, great building. And then the Qadial Mazhar. This was a very famous story. This was a competition in the late 1960s. Late 1960s. Yahya Khan, who was the president of Pakistan, he started this project to build a mazar for Mr. Jinnah, and there was an international competition held. And I think Raglan Squire, a firm out of England, won the competition. There were other, I think Pierluigi Nervi, a great Italian architect, was also involved in one of the participants of the competition. But the story goes is that Fatima Jinnah said nothing doing, and she had a favorite architect called Yahya Merchant in Bombay, and he was brought in and given the project. A lot of shor sharaba at that time, but in my opinion, I don't mind this building. I like it because what happens, buildings, whether you architecturally, you may like them, you may not like them, there could be some philosophical objections or oppositions to that. But over time, they become icon. This building is iconic. It is symbolic of Karachi, So I like it. It has become part of the permanent landscape of Karachi. It's not a bad building. This is Dawood Center near PIDC. This was in the 1960s. Pakistan was very closely aligned with the United States, and the United States, a lot of money was coming in through US aid into Pakistan. All the Mangla Dam, Tarbela Dam, all these things were built during that time. And so a lot of architects came. Well, not a lot, but a few architects came from the US and set up offices in Karachi because they were working on these projects. This was an architect called William Perry. And he was an American architect. And Habib Fida Ali, when he graduated and came back from England, worked with William Perry. I think his office was in Metropole. And this is Dawood Center for the Dawood Group. And this building was designed by him. What is very interesting is that these brise-soleil that you see on the facade, these sunshades, they are not painted. They are built in terrazzo, in mosaic. So they don't go bad. They're almost timeless, which is very interesting. If you have the opportunity, go and see close up. It's these materials that, like I said earlier, those previous architects of those days, the senior people, they could handle materials beautifully. Next. This is Ijaz Ahad's design, the Pakistan Insurance Corporation near Beach Luxury Hotel. This, I think, is the late 1970s. And Yasmeen Lari's Regent Plaza, which is now SIUT on Shara Faisal. And Yasmeen Lari again with the Finance and Trade Center. Now, this is around 1983, 84, maybe. So this kicks off, the postmodern, I don't know if you can call it postmodern, but this is where my time stops and you guys begin. Mehboob Cloth Market on Abdullah Harun Road. And these are the sunshades that I'm talking about at the Dawood Center. These are all made in terrazzo. Probably concrete, but finished in terrazzo. They're timeless. Institution of Engineers, I don't know who the architect is of this building. This is Hotel Mehran. Now, like Mr. Daruwala, this was done by Firdaus and Ibrahim. He was an engineer as well, but did a whole lot of architecture in these buildings. And his specialty was residential architecture. And he was a Bora like me. And, we have this neighborhood on Shara Faisal called Shabirabad, Shara Qaidin and Shara Faisal. I'd say about 70% of all the houses there were designed by him. But again, very good quality. If you see the houses that he did in the 1970s, even today, they haven't deteriorated. They've lasted 40, 50 years without any serious degradation because of climate and, weather and stuff. He did a lot of apartment buildings also, even in Clifton. And even those buildings retained their quality far longer than most other buildings. Salim Tharyani was like that. Surti Tharyani was, again, Salim was an engineer, but great knowledge of architecture and construction and materials, and even good designs. This, of course, is probably the best building in Karachi, if not Pakistan. This is Habib Fida Ali. This is Shell House on Chaudhry Khaliq Zaman Road. And this whole building is concrete, but sadly, it is not concrete as poured. It is all cladding. All of it is surface cladding, but really, really nice building. I think it was the first building to win an IAP award when IAP awards were instituted. And of course, Mehdi Ali Mirza, probably the finest architect Pakistan has ever produced. This house is near my house in Clifton, and it is the Libyan consulate. But, Libya being the way it is, this is deserted. Nobody's taking care of it. They have a guard. And Marvi and I managed to, convince him to let us see this building. This is fabulous. The picture doesn't do justice to it. If somehow you guys can manage to get in, it is amazing. These terraces that are cantilevering out about 18, 20 feet. Today, my engineers tell me, sorry, we can't do this. How they did it, and this is probably in the 1970s or late 60s. A really great building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Husnain Saab. This was a great treat. Before my moderator will jump into this, but I just wanted to have a quick conclusion to your this walkthrough. if you could just like conclude it by talking about these architects who were like engineers but not architects,
Yeah.
and kind of like collaborating that methodology, producing such high-end architecture, which was looking into materiality, looking into design, looking into floating cantilevers, floating forms, kind of sat really well in Karachi with the weather conditions and sustainability. So if you could just kind of like conclude that, and then we can move to the next speaker.
Yeah, I think why those, let's call them old masters, Nafi Siddiqui, Salim Thariani, Fida Hussain, even people like Miru Mistri, Daruwala. I think the contractors who would do these buildings, especially the smaller buildings, were local masons. A lot of them were Marwadis from Western India. And they had a lot of traditional techniques and procedures of doing construction. And these engineers and even architects would work very closely with the contractors, learn from them, and teach them. So this the way they used to handle was like a master builder sort of attitude, where they didn't just make drawings and bills of quantities, they just handed over to the contractor. They worked with the contractor. One man who loved doing this was Habib Fidari. 13 years with him, I learned a lot. He would, he would hate sitting in meetings and having a whole lot of documentation and specifications and contracts. He hated that. He said he was again the master builder mindset. And he'd tell the client, yeah, okay, how much money do you want to spend? Leave me alone. I'll sit with a contractor and put up your building. So I think those architects of the late 50s, the 1960s, to a large extent also worked on similar lines. So they got involved in the construction detailing. They learned a lot from the master craftsmen, and then they taught them a lot. So the result was, I think, very harmonious of the two points of view or the two mindsets or philosophies. And they did come up with some good buildings, which even if I go to see them today, they're really, really great buildings. You go and see something like Beach Luxury Hotel. Most of it is original. The floors, the wall finishes, the surface finishes of the building itself. Most of the finishes are the original finishes. Now that Beach Luxury Hotel is what, about 70 years old? So it's maybe 65 years old. They're worth seeing and visiting and, feel and touch the language of the architecture and the texture of it. So they used to come up with great buildings.
Thank you so much, Husnain Saab. Really appreciate it. We would like to later on, after when the speakers are done with their discussion, we would like to just have a quick discussion over the post-colonial section of it. Like, what was it to learn from outside and bring that architecture into Karachi? So we can have that discussion in the second round. Over to Sana and Ishal.
Thank you so much, Sir Husnain, for your valuable insights to the histories of buildings and the unique characteristics. Um, Next on our panel, we welcome Seher, Naveed, and Veera Rustomji to discuss their project, the Urban Repository Archive, URA. Seher and Veera are a collective who direct the Urban Repository Archive. Seher Naveed is a Karachi-based artist. She explores the socio-political development of urban environments and its impact on daily life. Her work delves into the architecture as a reflection of societal aspirations, especially in cities grappling with political instability. Currently, she's an associate professor at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, where she teaches courses in drawing and painting. Veera Rustomji is an artist from Karachi. Her practice deals with historiographical power structures and religious iconography portrayed through film, costume, and paintings. She is also a faculty at Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture and co-directs the Urban Repository Archive. The Urban Repository Archive is a project by the Department of Fine Art at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, IVS, documenting Karachi from the perspective of student research and practice, focused on thesis projects that respond to the city's shifting urban landscape. URA highlights how Karachi serves as a vital resource in contemporary art education. By curating these works Digitally, the archive showcases diverse materials, ideas, and pedagogies, reflecting the city's influence on artistic practice. URA positions the art school as a key site for interpreting urban life. Thank you, thank you, Seher and Veera, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So I'm Veera, and thank you first to Pakistan Chowk Community Centre for inviting us. Seher and I have been on the Heritage Walk multiple times with Shaheen Auntie, and we always send our students for it. So we're very happy to be here today because you'll actually see Pakistan Chowk and the printing presses of Pakistan Chowk on the URA website. So I'll introduce you to the URA. It's the Urban Repository Archive, which is housed in the Fine Art Department of the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, where my colleague Seher and I teach, and we are both alumni of. So we work in the Nasirwanji building of the university. And in fact, over here, you can see the construction and the relocation process of the Nasirwanji building, which was shifted stone by stone from Karadar to Clifton. The URA is primarily a website, and I'll just show that to you in a minute. But it's also a growing research cell that was created less than a year ago with support from Art South Asia Project. And but it's also a growing research cell, and we created this to learn and document how Karachi is growing and changing through art and the art school. So I'm just gonna escape this and actually show you the website. Just let me know if you can see it properly. Yeah. So the context of naming and creating an archive or for thesis projects from the Fine Art Department was because year after year, we see a number of students who use Karachi in both obvious and subtle ways, but no one was consciously documenting this and cataloging this and looking at the visual differences between these projects. So currently our URA archive has about 97 projects from students, and they're categorized thematically. So we have 5 themes: intersections, systems control, inward city, peripheries, and environs. So these themes catalyst, give context, and explore how students have been addressing relevant issues, which range from, the highways of Karachi to its migrant mentality, and generally speaking, the city's complex, uncontrollable nature. So each theme has a written explanation where we discuss what's important in this category and why we put works over here. But today, we also have 2 dedicated sections called the Projects and Urban Crafts section, where we conduct special projects aside from archiving student work. And given the context of today's talk about decolonizing methods of looking at art and architecture, we'll start by showing images and discussing the urban craft and project section. So I'll just go back into my slides. Okay. So the premise of building projects within the URA lens is to create a current and much needed space in Pakistani art and architecture schools. So Seher and myself, and I'm sure many of you here today, feel like South Asian art can tend to be saved, cataloged, and showcased in a very hierarchical format, sometimes through nostalgia of what our country used to be during the British era, and also sometimes through blatant nationalism of prestige and refinement. In this approach, art and culture organizations tend to keep looking back, but forget to look at what lies here today in front of us. So to counter these selected narratives, we as faculty and artists want to expand our students' understanding of art and architecture and the choices made by mainstream and nationalist archives by using the city to teach from and to learn from. We're interested in knowing what is Karachi today in all its ugliness and why it's important to document students' responses to this city. So over here, you can see some of our recent excursions to Keti Bandar, Kimari, Bolton Market, Delhi Colony, and Pakistan Chowk with URA interns. And these sites may not have, towering gizri stone buildings with painted glass, but they have make-do structures, market systems, a range of materials, and sometimes it's just about stopping to observe how art and architecture is a way of daily survival. So not only do we feel that these sites offer us teaching resources in our fieldwork, but we're also gaining knowledge in the form of conversations with people who live and work at these sites through informal presentations by shop owners, fishermen, butchers, scrap dealers. In a formal art education, we tend to not have conversations about how these jobs impact, like, simple jobs like kabari walas, how do they impact our markets, urban planning, and the visual reach of Karachi. So these findings are part of the urban crafts section of the URA website, where we've been looking at what is being made and sold in around Karachi. We're not necessarily interested in how laborious these crafts are or how traditional they are, but we are more interested in looking at how things have changed, how our community is adapting, and why is it important to step away from looking at craft solely through age-old heirloom context. So over here, you can see that we've been looking at how boats are made and painted at Ibrahim Hederi. We also see washed up and discarded safety gears, which get sold to people who work on the docks. The printing presses around Pakistan Chowk, which were imported decades ago, but still produce quality printing. At the bottom left is one of the many textile pieces made at Keti Bandar that Mahigir women with materials like sequins and threads from the nearest shop, they're buying them from the nearest shop with the help of WWF. One of our alumni, Khatija, was documenting Bori and styrofoam boats, which you can see in the center. And another ongoing urban craft project is looking at beads and plastic jewelry being sold at Bolton Market, which our alumni Manoj introduced us to through his work with textiles. Okay, so some of the assignments and examples that we do with our fine art students are on the URA website, but here on this slide with these images, we're showing you some snippets of those assignments which address the locations close to and far away from the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. I just mentioned Keti Bandar, which we only visited a week ago, and it's on the Hajamaro Creek, and it's 3.5 hours southeast of Karachi. And that yellow elevated structure you see on the top right was built by WWF to provide safety to fishermen in high tide monsoon seasons. And so these visits that we do in the context of the URA is really interesting because we learn about ad hoc architecture. And this structure is so different from the thatch roofed homes that you will find the Mahigir have to usually make around the Indus Delta. And these trips and the research that we do with the URA really makes us think about what will be left architecturally and art-wise to study Karachi, in the years to come. So before we went to Keti Bandar, before we go to these sites, we tend to do a lot of research. And one of the places that we've been doing a lot of research on Karachi is the Sin Wildlife Library, which is in the old Freemasons Lodge. And we're looking at a current internship that we're running is looking at the coastal resources of Karachi. And a major source for us that we found at the Sin Wildlife Library are the handouts and diagrams that the fisheries department used to print in the 1980s and in the 1990s. So yeah, to summarize the projects and the documentation we do at the URA, it's all about trying to use what is readily available, what's in front of us, and also the realities of what it's like to live in an unglamorous city like Karachi. Okay, so now Seher is going to show you some student examples of visual responses to the city.
Hi. Thanks, Veera. So I think I have just about 5 minutes. I'm going to try and cover as much. I'm going to show, as Veera said, we're just going to show you some examples of student work, also how they connect to one or two of the themes, what kind of research processes are they looking at. As Veera just mentioned earlier, the URA is deeply interested in how students are visually engaging with Karachi's urban condition. We're trying to understand the methods and the forms of visual thinking our students are using to make sense of the city. And Karachi is a city with a very particular kind of urban problematic, not just in terms of congestion or infrastructure, but something deeper, how space itself is produced and policed. If you think of spaces like DHA, Clifton, and other gated community, these aren't just upper class enclaves, but actively participate in creating urban isolation. There's a fraught relationship between neighborhoods and urban design here. And instead of building connections and collective life, the design of the city often ends up reinforcing this segregation, which is economic, ethnic, and even psychological. And so naturally, many students are responding to this tension. And some projects you see here on your screen are examples of this. The paintings on the left and center reflect a quiet, almost passive relationship with the neighborhood, where there's very little visible activity, only stillness and a sense of separation. So this project we housed in the Inward City theme, which explores how Karachi seeps into interior spaces and shapes our relationship with home and those around us. The aerial rooftop drawing on the right part of the screen is a series exploring rooftops of a residential area in Clifton as quiet contrast to the rest of the city. These were spaces that were once social, communal, but are now silent, disconnected, not just from the house below, but from the city itself. And this particular project lives in the intersection theme of the website, which explores ideas of the built environment, materials, public, and gendered spaces. Veera, if you can go to the next screen. So the choice of methods used by our students to research their interests and ideas isn't random. It often comes from their training, aesthetic preferences, the kind of materials they have access to, even the limitations or politics of these materials. And that's something we're also interested in at the URA. How does the process of making what you choose to see and use, how you use it, shape what you're able to say about the city? And so ultimately, the visual archive becomes not just a record of Karachi's condition, but a record of the many ways people are thinking about the city visually, materially, and emotionally. I'll just go through the images on the screen to explain what I've just said. So on the top right, our student Alishbaz isolates design elements from high-rises and apartments, breaking down the forms that shape dense urban living. On the left, Anmol's project looks at the idea of a dream house near Safura Churangi, focusing on features like balconies, secure gates as symbols of class and aspiration. She documents both new constructions and older homes being erased, like the distinctive conical houses, and which Anmol used to say Tikon Ghar, which are now disappearing to make way for vertical development. And in the bottom right, a west side, quick drawings explore how shifting traditions and external influences like CPEC and local politics are fictionally transforming the aesthetics of buildings across Karachi. So the URA is also interested in archiving how different histories are being rechanneled through personal memory, oral accounts, and creative interpretation. This is important because so much of Karachi's history, especially cultural and social memory, gets lost in this rush of demolitions, redevelopment, and just everyday survival. These projects give insight into how the city remembers, how it forgets, and how space and memory interact in urban lives. So in this animation by Sharoz, He revisits the city's lost cinemas, like Nishat Cinema, which was destroyed under suspicious circumstances. His research drew from communal memory, newspaper articles, and essays on ideas of entertainment and public spaces in Karachi, and then turning these fading histories into animated records that question what replaces these erased cultural spaces. The next project, just quickly explain it and then Veera can play it. So this is by one of our students whose entire research was mainly based on narration, in which he was documenting popular opinion and street level conversations with residents of North Nazimabad, where he lived, and which revealed how unplanned development and micro corruption shape people's lives and experiences. Veera, you can just play it for a few seconds.
नॉर्थ नाजिबाद में पानी का एक बहुत बड़ा मसला है जहां लोग डोमेस्टिक यूज के लिए टैंकर्स का इस्तेमाल करते हैं। वहां तेजी से बढ़ती हुई कमर्शलाइजेशन और कंस्ट्रक्शन की वजह से लोगों का ऐसा मानना है कि इस मसले में और मजीद इजाफा हो जाएगा। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, एक घर जहां पहले 6 लोग रहा करते थे, अब उस घर को तोड़कर एक 12 फ्लोर्स की बिल्डिंग बना दी जाएगी जहां अब ऑलमोस्ट 300 लोग रहा करेंगे। इनिशियली वाटर और सीवरेज की लाइंस जो 50 साल पहले डाली गई थी, वो इन सारे लोगों को अकोमोडेट करने के लिए सफिशिएंट नहीं है, जिसकी वजह से प्रॉब्लम और इश्यूज क्रिएट हो जाएंगे।
I think this is fine. It gives a rough idea. We can move to the next slide. All these works are on the URA website if anyone's interested in learning more about them. So we'll end this presentation with 2 works from the periphery section of the URA, where students explore areas that fall outside Karachi's mapped limits, but spaces which remain intimately linked to the city. Images here on the screen showcase a project where the student reimagines and reconstructs the traditional relief from her hometown Gotki in Sindh, using fabric, layering, stitching, and color as a way to reflect on distance, memory, and the overwhelming contrast between her hometown and then this dense landscape of Karachi. The next slide, Veera, if you could. Yeah. So in a similar way, Manoj Kumar uses fabric and thread to explore Hindu mythology and how religious stories are tied to the land and its landmarks. So after moving from Umarkot to Karachi to study at Indus, Manoj felt compelled to revisit the Hinglaj pilgrimage, a journey he had taken many times with his family. But this time the experience was different. What struck him was how development had altered the spiritual landscape. For example, he represents a newly built concrete stairway cutting across the sacred Chandragroup volcano with stark white dashes, as you can see, and which become a symbol of disruption to the ritual flow of the site. Drawing on his family's photographic archives and memory, Manoj recreated how people once used to move through these spaces. And through the use of textile, he reinterprets these myths and pilgrimages, reflecting on perhaps a changing relationship with not just religion, belonging, but also with the fragility of traditions in the face of modern constructions. Thank you. This is it from us.
Thank you so much, Seher and Veera. This was amazing. We'll come back to it through questions.
Thank you, Seher and Veera, for your truly compelling exploration of archival methods and documentation through art. Continuing our discussion, we now welcome Saba Khan. Saba Khan's interdisciplinary work stretches over the field of art, ecology, performance, colonial histories, which come together through expeditions, research, and fieldwork work. The work explores the history and politics of water bodies, flow, fluidity, bodies blocking water, and bodies moving along water. Saba's multimedia works traffic in the language of memorial, monumental, and public projects, from miniature dioramas to of a bureaucrat's boring office, flashing LEDs of retro sci-fi machines seen at power stations to indigo textile banners honoring peasant revolts. She balances grandeur, artifice, and satire in order to explore the cracks in structures. She has taught at the National College of Arts, Lahore for 13 years and now teaches at the Chelsea College of Arts as an associate lecturer. In 2014, founded Murray, a museum artist residency that continues as a satirical collective, Pak Khawateen Painting Club in 2019. Saba currently lives and works between London and Lahore. Welcome, Saba. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's really nice to see Karachi and making me feel very nostalgic. And thank you, Marvi and Marvi's team and Seham for inviting. I think I came to Pakistan Chowk for a presentation many years ago, and it's so nice to see that things have come forward and are moving ahead. So I'll share my presentation with you. Okay, so I will be talking about my practice, which is mostly looking at water and power, and I'll go back to how that became my interest. So when I went to do my master's in the US, and when I came back in 2010, there wasn't much to do for artists of my generation. And I decided to start my own initiative, and I started this artist space, which would run only for the summer because most of us artists teach. And it was in Marvi, which we all know it was a former colonial hill station. But I realized when I started inviting artists over there that many people don't know these histories of colonialism and how there's so much degradation in the ecology. So we started doing these thematic residencies. So there was one residency on water, one on land, one on forest. And some of the panelists here were also there at the residency, like Veera and Seher also came. So this was the residency house, and at the end of each residency, we would open up the space in a public building where we would have like an open house. And this was kind of like an anomaly to Marvi, as we all know, people just go there for eating and for picnicking. But Marvi was really the catalyst where I started to think about water and how water is it is a resource which is not allocated equally. So we would hold these drawing parties, which I think is a better word, for these nomadic children. They're Gujjar children who live very close to the residency in the forest. And they would come every year to kind of play and draw. You can see Hashmi conducting the workshop. And this is how they live in the forest down below from us. And then I started thinking about water connections. You can see Seher going down to the huts. And yeah, so this is how their water source comes from. So it's a spring, which is now, they say, I haven't been in 2 years, but they say somebody has shut it down for them and they don't have the source anymore. And my water source was also quite precarious. I would get water only once or twice a week for 15 minutes, which meant that you could not take showers every day. Showering is a real luxury in Marvi unless you have very powerful connections. So I want to go back and see where the pipeline is really coming from. So this led me to, I was invited to Lahore Biennale by Hurul Qasimi, and it led me to go to form this collective and go to an expedition and see where the source of water is coming from. So you have if you look at the map, we have these dams like Mangla and Tabela, which are from the 60s and 70s. So they were like our first kind of post-colonial modernist, very mega projects to kind of push us into modernity. And I was looking at that decade of 60s and 70s, which is also a really interesting time in Pakistan. Okay, so this was shown. Yeah, so I was also looking at PIA and how we had invited Pierre Cardin as a designer for the PI uniforms. It was a moment to kind of look at space, like not space, but like aircraft, and looking at aircraft and travel as a way of projecting yourself as a modernist country. And I was also looking at the Girl Guides, which were purely colonialist projects. So Girl Guides were formed to kind of train children and women to live in the colonies. So it was a way that if you were thrown into the hinterland of Australia, you already knew how to light fire, or you knew how to tend a wound. So it was a way to kind of toughen you up. So when you left England for like some colony, you knew your basic stuff. So I combined the two and I made this uniform, which was kind of tacky and cheesy and kind of looking like the Girl Guides of today as well. And we decided as a collective, we would visit different sites. And it was also, I was thinking my own self as an explorer, which is very like a colonial project as well, like going to expeditions and what is my role in it. And over here, you can see the prototype of the dam. And at the back, it's the actual this is the Bela Dam. And the uniforms were also kind of a way to gain access or to gain kind of confidence of the bureaucrats that we would visit at site. Otherwise, we would not be taken seriously. Like, I mean, if I went into meetings without my uniform, nobody would really talk to me, give me time of the day. But with the uniform, it was a completely different image that they would have of me. So you will see some of our field trip or the expedition with, footage. So this is the spillway of the Bela Dam. This is the Mangla Dam turbine for the electricity. So now we have like this whole dam making project, which has come full circle. It stopped for quite a big time where Kalabagh Dam was stopped. And then there wasn't enough dam making, and now it's come back with the rage. And we know that there was also this crowdfunding done by the former Chief Justice Saqib Nisar. And this is the Chinese dam we visited in Dasu. And you can see the tunnel. And then they were very keen on making everything very transparent for us. And they took us to one of their labor camps. And this is the dining hall in the labor camp where you have the Lazy Susan with half Chinese food and half Pakistani food. But I think now I can't get this kind of access anymore, which we can talk about later. Then I was also looking at what is lost around dams, and because these dams are very huge reservoirs. Most dams that you have in Europe, they don't have reservoirs. So they are these big lakes that inundate a large portion of the land. So these are petroglyphs from the Silk Road, which are going to be inundated by the Diamir Bhasha Dam. And a lot of work on it was done in the 1970s again by Professor Dani and some professors from Germany, which I'm forgetting their name. But there are like 30,000 of these petroglyphs which are going to be destroyed. This is your Mangla Dam on top and the esplanade at the bottom. And you have the Sadakan painting. And it was also interesting because a lot of the bureaucrats were friends with artists at that time. So you will see like a lot of these collaborations. There was still a lot of kind of the extremism, really, the seeds still were not there at the moment. So you see like a lot of artistry, even the documents that I saw, like catalogs of these reports were very artistically done, which you don't see any longer. This is how the installation ended up looking like. It was meant to look like a power station of a dam, which are green. Some of them are green in color, and a lot of them haven't been upgraded. And you have that era of the retro sci-fi, which is coming in the aesthetics of the power plants as well. So you had all this machinery with different rocks that had been collected, or videos or sound pieces, which were information about the dam. This was water collected from the Bela Dam. Then coming to the next project, so the next idea was to go down the Indus River. So I was particularly focusing on the Indus. And because it's, as a person from Lahore, it's so psychologically far away that you can't even imagine what it looks like. So I decided to go on the barrages of Indus, which are colonial and post-colonial from the 1950s. So there are 7 of them. If you go down the Indus River, the last one is where Keti Bandar, where Veera and Seher also mentioned. This was shown at the Sharjah Biennale 2 years ago. This time we had a larger grant to play around with, and we went more pied cadre. These were made in collaboration with the designer Zora Rahman, and it was also COVID era, so that's why we have the masks as well. So you'll see that these barrages are slightly different in architecture. They're more flat, whereas the dams are more like in a valley, or they're more higher up. These are more straightforward. Although barrage and dam, I realize, are really the same word, they're interchangeable, but for some reason, the flat ones in Sindh and Punjab are called barrage, and the ones in the north are called dams, which I'm not sure why they're called like that. So this is one of the first barrages on the Indus, built in 1932 in Sakhar, which almost made the British government bankrupt because it was such an ambitious project. And there were a lot of people moved around this area. So once they made the barrage, the idea was to move around tribes which were meant to be very productive and put them in place so that they can grow food. So they were putting even warring Balochi tribes and trying to not make them like nomadic. So the idea was to make people sedentary and also very productive. So at Keti Bandar, we met fishermen and people from the farmers community who have turned activists, and they were singing songs by Jim Said for us, and also talking about how there's so much sea intrusion and a lot of the land is now under the sea, and they're not able to cultivate anything over there. I think it's the same platform that maybe Seher showed, but this is like a simpler version of it. This is what the installation looked like. So there were parts coming again from the 1950s barrages. These were maps also made in indigo and calico of different parts of the Indus River. And this was animation done by Maria Khan and Zoreen Murtaza. And this is the other side of the installation. You can see the mannequin here. These were bricks collected from different ancient sites. These were emblems made in Harappa with the logo of the painting club. These are like numberings that you see on the barrage. And these are different parts of Sindh that I documented. And this is the current project that I just finished. I still haven't shown it anywhere, but I was looking at what is the alternative to dams and these big projects that have really put Pakistan into debt, which really no one talks about because they're billions of dollars in cost, but there's no way but we don't have an industry to revive those costs. So glacier grafting is something that I found out about, and I thought somebody was joking with me, but they're practicing it in Skardu, and I've heard this practicing in not the place next to Hunsa. I'm forgetting the name, but I can come back to it. So this professor in Zakir Hussain, I met him in Skardu, and he gets requests by small villages, and they ask for him to graft a glacier. So they believe that their ancestors were grafting glaciers, and they somehow lost that craft, and they can maintain or even expand glaciers, which will help the environment cool down. They become like reservoirs for water storage. And they really believe in it, and it's a community project. The whole community gets involved. So what you do is you go to an existing glacier, you cut up like parts of it. This is all a glacier. And then you take chunks of it, you transport it, and then you take it up to a very high altitude. You can see them carrying over here. It's like a very fast 2.5 or 3 day trek. And then they have these little small shepherd's huts where they spend one night. And then they climb up, and on the shady side of the mountain, they bury what they call a male glacier and a female glacier and do this ritual around it. And they believe that it will start growing and giving water in a few years. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saba. Really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll get back to the questions then later.
Thank you, Saba Khan. We are grateful for your powerful insights. Up next, we have Komal Salman. Komal Salman is the founder of Folkloristan, a collective dedicated to researching, translating, visualizing, and documenting Pakistan's history, folklore, and design heritage. With an academic background in media design and production and a passion for history, the scope of her work revolves around historical storytelling. Thank you, Komal, for being here. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me over. Let me just quickly share my screen. So one of the projects on Folkloristan is essentially a design archive where I specifically curate graphic design, because most of our local design tradition does fall under the category of folklore. But what doesn't fall under the category of folklore is, things which are slightly more contemporary, but still very cultural. We curate just about everything, a random assortment of prints, book covers, magazines, digests, signage, posters, film adverts. So just about everything. We also look into stamps, currency, banknotes, graffiti, and also typography and old calligraphy traditions. One of the reasons I built the archive was because as a creative, and more specifically as a graphic designer, I did not know where to look for inspiration for local design specifically. And I used to spend a lot of hours scrolling Arabic Pinterest, Persian Pinterest, especially for inspiration around the Urdu scripts or any of our other ethnic scripts. And yeah, I decided, why not? If we can solve a problem, we should just do it. I want to talk a little bit about why archives are really important and why the lack of documentation is a problem. Because I feel like a lot of it does have to do with political instability, because art needs peace to thrive. You can make art in very tense environments also, like we've seen art coming out of Gaza, but there is a certain darkness to the art. So it's not that the art is not being produced, but it's not being cataloged, because nobody's thinking about cataloging and archiving when you're thinking about survival. The second thing is a lack of resources. I think some of the other speakers did mention mega projects, the lack of industry, all of that. It does boil down to the fact that you do need resources. And then there's a third thing, which is the marginalization of design as a discipline, because there are certain cultural taboos around it where art and artistic practice is not seen as a quote unquote serious degree. And then internationally speaking, a lot of the design practices in question are largely dictated by the global north. If you see the contemporary design and branding tradition in Pakistan today, you're going to see a visible influence of the global north. Design as a subject itself has also been colonized in a lot of different ways. And then we also need to keep in mind that at the time of partition in 1947, a lot of the major printing industries, especially around Urdu, was based in Hyderabad, Lucknow, and Delhi. So we were only left with Lahore. And then we had to sort of rebuild the printing industry from scratch. And we did not just lose access to a language once, we lost languages twice around. And with a language, you also lose design language. So if you go to, let's say, Lahore, you will find a lot of buildings in Lahore and Peshawar which have mosaics in Farsi on them. But you lost Farsi after colonization. And then with it, fast forward to 2025, a lot of the design coming out, especially in a certain socioeconomic class, there's design in Urdu and other local languages, which is catering to the masses. And then you have design in English, your storefronts and all of that. That, especially my generation, we struggle with Urdu. We struggle with reading Urdu. Our parents have Urdu books which we cannot think about reading because we just simply lack this speed. We've sort of adapted English as our own language, which is fine, but the adaptation of a new language coming at the cost of another language essentially creates that disparity in design tradition. I'm going to move on to quickly show you the visual identity of Pakistan through the decades. Most of these I've curated for my archive because, again, we need to remember that to deconstruct anything, we need to construct it first. And I don't think we have a visual identity which we can look at, process, absorb, and understand. Because only when we understand something and we have something to study in front of us in the form of an archive, then can we talk about decolonization. So essentially, I do feel like archives are an extremely important tool of decolonization in themselves. So in the 1940s, we had the Second World War going on, and we had all of these anti-imperialist posters going on. There was also a lot of pro-imperialist propaganda. In the 1950s, there's a new country, there's a new identity being put out. It's very minimal. Also in the 1950s, keeping in mind the technology in terms of design and in terms of printing, it's very minimal, but it's still very distinct and it's very clean to look at. Like, it makes you feel good when you look at it. Moving on to the 1960s, you start seeing Eurocentrism, coming back in the ads, in the kind of printing which is being done. I've shared a few advertisements here. Also, you can see that the industry back in the 60s was way more liberal than what we have today. Along come the 1970s, and you revert to this sort of cluttered, very different aesthetic. So in very sharp contrast to the 50s, now you suddenly have this. And then we go on to the 1980s, where there's a lot of permitted propaganda going on. I've put permitted in brackets because I do feel like essentially all media we consume in some way, shape, or form, it is propaganda. But there is good propaganda and then there is bad propaganda. And I feel like that also eventually ties into the fact that colonialism and neocolonialism and the New World Order, essentially, it does uphold some of the colonialist norms. And we see it everywhere. Moving on to the 1990s, I feel like the 1980s were a very bad time for the film industry. And that may or may not be why people sort of reverted to reading. So there's a lot of very interesting work being done in typography, in type design. There's some very cute covers. There's a lot of experimental typography. Also in the 1980s, computers became more mainstream, and you can see like designers having a lot more fun with type than we see a few decades ago. And then in the 2000s, again, we go back to the same kind of aesthetic we had in the 70s. And then there's this propaganda poster, which was sold off in the black market and published illegally, of course. But the reason I put this here, because essentially the message at the core is the same. It is Muslims against a foreign white non-Muslim force. But suddenly the whole identity has been deconstructed and reconstructed, and now that propaganda is just not acceptable. And yes, that does have a lot to do with how things are going on with the whatever is happening in the geopolitical sphere. I feel like the word terrorist itself is both political and colonial, because it depends. We do have a global empire still in place. It depends if you serve their interests or if you go against them. And that is what your identity will be built around, essentially. Moving on to the 2010s, we see this revival of the silver screen. We had a lot of drama hits coming out. I've included some of the posters. And even though there's these posters are also character focused, but we see a visible difference in the color tones, the palettes, and the overall vibe if we compare them to posters from the previous decade. And then in the 2020s, we have a lot of fresh graduates coming out into the market who are studying graphic design, who are studying typography. We're seeing Urdu scripts and Urdu fonts coming out left, right, and center. One of these examples is Meher Nastalik. Ustad Meher is an Nastalik calligrapher, but his son taught himself engineering, and he turned the script into a Unicode and made it computer compatible. So I feel like there's a lot of room for innovation coming out. The second is an Urdu font based on the Hoffman tangent. And then the third is like an Urdu brush font by a really amazing graphic designer and also a friend of mine, Ravaz. Now that we've seen what our design essentially looks like, I'm going to talk about what it means to decolonize for us, because I think setting the premise essentially leads any conversation. Now, decolonization is very subjective to us. For example, a lot of the work around decolonizing design has been done taking into the framework of places like America or places like Australia, where the indigenous population was actively erased from existence and also from the public sphere. And then you have these new people coming in, settling into a colony, and everything is suddenly revolving around them. But that's not the case with us. Most people who live in what is now geographically Pakistan have been living here for several centuries. Yes, we did have migration, but again, the bulk of that migration came from people who still lived in Punjab, like my grandparents. They moved from one side of Punjab to the other side of Punjab. It's still somewhat the same vicinity. They're not quote unquote aliens to the land. And then we also need to acknowledge the fact that there are other ways in which systems of collective oppression and repression are upheld. And it is only after we acknowledge it that we can move on. And whether we like it or we don't like it, I do feel like in some way, shape, or form, we are a part of that system, because we are the class of this country which speaks English. That alone puts us in that position where we may be in some way, shape, or form upholding that system, intentionally or unintentionally. I'm going to break down what we think of good design. And this is where I would appreciate if anybody wants to participate. But when you think of a good logo, or a good storefront or like good branding in the context of Pakistan, it's going to be bougie, it's going to be Instagrammable. We love the ethnic vibe, but we don't like it raw. And in its natural state where it exists, for example, when I go back home to my village, people still have hand knotted carpets there. But the hand knotted carpet there is probably next to a wall with seepage in it. So it's not Instagrammable. We like a hand knotted carpet rolled out maybe on really fine marble. So we can take a picture of it and we can post it. And it happens very less often that we'll see a poster or anything which is not in English, and it's going to make us go like, wow. And we do see a lot of design around the streets, on the roads, on billboards, on panaflexes, which is essentially not in English, but it doesn't make us go wow. It's the design in English which makes us go wow. And I do want to put this one other thing out there, that design is never neutral. It is one of those things which cannot be neutral. There's also that disparity in discussions around design, that there is design and then there is craft. So anything which does not fall into design practices dictated by the global north automatically falls into craft. And then there's, like, for example, the ajrak, the rali, Sawati embroidery. All of it is quote unquote craft. Kolhapuri is a craft, but when Prada makes it, it's product design. So there's also that disparity in discussions, which I think is something we should be consciously aware of. And every time a design comes out, or every time you see a design, I feel like 2-3 questions tell you a lot about that design, but I don't think we actively ask ourselves that. Who's making the design? Who is it for? What purpose does it serve? And who is profiting from it? And this also brings us to the politics of design a little bit, because how many people, like most of the design or the contemporary design in today's Pakistani landscape, at least the ones we see on Instagram, or our branding design and everything. I'm sorry, a lot of my design examples are around graphic design because I'm a graphic designer myself, but please bear with me on that. How many people actually make it to university, and how many people are actually capable of doing a full-fledged, very refined branding in English, let's say? And then you have other kinds of design, which was traditionally done on copper or, truck art, which was for anyone and everyone to consume. But that's not being done by everyone. That's being done by a very select few people who are craftspeople. And most of the times, unfortunately, they don't get paid enough. We as graphic designers probably get paid more simply because there's that disparity on who is it for and who is paying for the design. So, and then what are we doing to our crafts is another discussion I want to get into, because I do feel like design ethics are something which are not as much discussed as they should be. So nowadays we have a lot of truck art stickers which are coming out, and people are opting to use stickers on their trucks and their buses and their rickshaws instead of actually getting them painted. What it's essentially doing is it's killing the industry. So you have a craft, but instead of preserving it and instead of giving it room to grow, you're essentially kind of actively contributing to killing it. And most of the people making money from these stickers have nothing to do with the actual craft. It's not benefiting the craftspeople in any way. And then you have very good examples like Meher type, which take a craft and they use innovation to help keep the craft alive instead of doing the opposite. Again, what does indigenous mean to us? I feel like design is never just physical, and it's also centered around ideology. Which brings me to the question, which is more like a philosophical question, but what is our ideology as individuals or as a society collectively? I think one thing we've forgotten how to do is designing for remembrance as opposed to designing for distraction. The reason the old masters created such amazing stuff was because at the core of architectural design and any other form of design, may it be mosaics, may it be painting, there was this principle that when you see design, it should connect you to your spiritual higher self. Like you look at something, it should make you feel good. But now we're designing so somebody stops scrolling and somebody gives us a like. So instead of making people remember and contemplate and appreciate, we're designing to distract them. And then design used to center the heart in multiple ways. For example, in most of the mosques you see from the Mughal era, it's not just the material itself which was used in the building, but the material was used in specific proportions to have an impact on you metaphysically and physically. And then also the height, the curves, the details, everything was meant to impact you. So you center the heart and not center distraction. And then we used to have this thing even in other daily practices we use. People used to come first. Community used to come first, which is something we don't follow anymore. Like, for example, my mom tells me that when she was younger, there used to be like 1 or 2 tandoors in the whole village, and everybody used to cook together. So even if somebody did not have money for flour, nobody ever knew. But now it's capitalism first. And I feel like that is a conversation we need to revisit, because yes, we need money, but how can we make money and still put community first? These two don't have to be mutually exclusive. And money does not have to come at the cost of exploiting something. Because people were still having all of their needs met without destroying everything under the sun for centuries. And then I feel like there's intentionality, which also plays a huge role in design, because even if I look at it at the perspective of, let's say, a Muslim designer, even from the point of view of faith, intention is what is supposed to guide you. But when our intention is that we want the attention or the click, then that becomes a problem. So our art was never only art. It was science, art, creativity, and ideology rolled into one, along with ethics and philosophy. And I feel like that is something we really need to go back to. And then again, documenting to decolonize. We need to identify and acknowledge problems, accept the circumstances we have, and then make the best of what we do. Because integration and inclusion beyond token representation is something I feel like we can really do. And I think whatever action, no matter how small, it does make an impact. And that's it from me. Thank you. And I'm sorry I went over time.
Thank you so much, Komal. Not at all. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Komal, for sharing your thoughtful perspective. That being said, we will now open the floor for our question and answer session. If there are any audience member who wish to ask questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box or raise your hand. Till then, we have questions. We do have some in the chat box. And now I will request my co-moderator Sana to please read out the questions.
We have a few from the team, 9 to 1 team. The first one is for Husnain Lotia. You led the IIP team to review the Karachi building and town planning regulations. Can you talk about how to tackle old colonial zoning rules to make Karachi's architecture more in line with Pakistan's post-1947 identity?
Post 1940s identity. I'm going to tell you something which is very negative. The way the bylaws are working now, they're essentially serving the forces of greed. Okay. Developers have a tremendous, huge amount of influence, and they manipulate and basically massacre the bylaws to suit, commercial profit and that sort of stuff. How they can be modified to suit our post-colonial, frankly speaking, you've got me there. I don't know what that means. Bylaws are some things that serve very technical and very existential needs, how best to build in cities so that you get more and more benefit for the residents of that city. whether you can add a cultural color to that or a cultural input. Yes, you can look at heritage buildings, or you can look at architectural philosophies, or you can have rules and laws, which we already do, that certain buildings are listed as heritage and you can't mess around with them. But I think beyond that, if you're looking for a preservation or a continuation of a cultural heritage, then you have to look at things at a very large scale, the conservation and protection of neighborhoods, which means lifestyles. As Komal was talking, I found her presentation very interesting of maintaining, for example, our truck art, or before that, something like Ajrak, the print and the graphic design of Ajrak, and the kind of clothes we now wear. So how do you continue that, bring it into the mainstream, and not just preserve everything like a museum piece? To do that with bylaws is frankly a tough question. How do you do it? Like I said, preserving your heritage buildings, preserving your old buildings, and preserving your old neighborhoods. Now, we're not doing it at the level of neighborhoods because the commercial factor and the prices of land and comes in a very, very strong level and a very powerful input and impact and influence. So really don't know how to answer that question.
It's okay. We have another question from one of the audience members, and this is for Komal and Husnain Saab. I'll read out the question. Post-colonial Karachi seems to have very few historic mosques that have survived or are recognized as heritage sites. I've tried to find some but couldn't locate any, while other colonial era places of worships like churches and temples are better preserved. Could this be primarily a preservation challenge, or does it reflect the social and cultural heritage of Karachi's Muslim communities during the colonial period?
Komal, you want to go first?
No, sir, please.
Yeah, I think mosques, that's a great question. I think the thing is that the heritage, as we know it, post-colonial heritage, there are some great mosques that were built. One mosque which is very interesting is the Gol Masjid in Defense in phase 1. Very interesting thing, but around independence, there weren't many significant mosques in terms of significant architecture, was simply because the British weren't building mosques. And we ourselves were building mosques, but mosques were probably built, a lot of them were built with community contributions, financial contributions. Even today, this is it's a fabulous tradition. Like, I do a lot of traveling in the mountains in the north, and you go on any road, even minor roads where there are a couple of villages, and you'll find this sign which says Chanda Barai Masjid. So a lot of our mosques were built by public donations and in an evolutionary sort of process. Did we sit and design mosques as a one-off project? Not very many. And it is an interesting question that I think that was your question of the heritage or the tradition of mosques. But a lot of mosques were built organically. Very few were built like the Badshai Masjid. Okay, there was an emperor who said, "Lo, let there be a masjid," and though there was a masjid, and that sort of thing. But a lot of them were built by people organically. through public donations and contributions.
I mean, I could add on to this that the mosques right now, or the ones which were previously developed, they also had a very different methodology. Like, it was not just a place of prayer and opened 5 times. It was also used as a center of education and cultural making and conversations and like a town hall. So these courtyards were used for multi-purpose activities throughout the day. So they were more a unification of the community. And right now, because the way things have moved on, they have become more like a space of like 5 times rather than being a 24-hour space. So that is also one of the reasons that the whole ideology of a mosque and a sacred space has converted into a very capitalistic methodology. So it's a place of where people congregate, hear a sermon, raise funds, and then go. So it becomes like a duty rather than becoming a community. So, and then we can talk more about this. I think there are a couple of more questions we'll take up. And then maybe Komal, if you want to add on, since you were
Yeah,
also.
I wanted to second what Husnain Sab said, that the British were not building mosques, and before that, Karachi was slightly isolated from the Mughal sphere of influence. So you do have this one gorgeous mosque in Thatta, but because the emperors and the princes were mainly living in Lahore and in Delhi, most of the architecture is around there. And a lot of times when communities build mosques, it's just for function and they're not really built to be this masterpiece. That only happens when you have a patron in question. One exception to this is this one mosque in a village near Punjab, which is made of white marble entirely. And the villagers just got together and they decided we want to do it. And that's a very pretty mosque. I'm forgetting the name, but I did do a piece on it, so you can go to the website and check.
Okay, thank you. We have another question for Veera and Seher. What does archive mean to students when they are documenting and researching? Are they thinking of archive as a form of reflection, of documentation, or of something else?
I think with each student, the word archive is subjective. But I also think, it's funny that we talk about decolonization. Unfortunately, I think when we as Pakistanis think archive, there's a very certain image of tea-stained paper, um, buildings that are very old, family photographs. These notions of archive are coming from images that are kind of ingrained into us through education, film, media, things that we're, constantly exposed to. In some ways, yeah, I do think the students who work with us at the URA are making an archive of reflections. But I also think in some ways the archive that we're trying to build in the URA is about contention points, like countering archives that already exist in this city, and also thinking about like so for instance, we have a couple of students who are bringing their own personal research into neighborhoods like Lari or Malir, into the URA with their thesis year projects. Last year, we had a student called Khatija who is from Ibrahim Hedri, and her work is artistic, right? It's a film. She's not trying to. She made a film and then she also made some objects and then she collected objects from Ibrahim Hedri and from Bandal Island and brought them into a thesis project. In no ways does her in no ways does her work tend to say what is right and what is wrong, but in so many ways her work is telling you what the realities are. And sometimes I think we tend to choose to make archives on, things that are aesthetically beautiful, but sometimes maybe we need to just stop and document and look at things that are harsh and difficult and uh, not easy to adjust with. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Veera. The next question is for Komal. Folkloristan digitalizes Pakistan's oral traditions. How do you decide which local stories best show how regional identities formed after 1947?
I I don't think there is one particular story which really shows
Yeah.
how regional identities were formed.
Mm.
But I do think that all stories collectively show that um, we don't just have a problem of inter-ethnic stereotypes within ethnicities, we also have a problem of inter-tribal stereotypes. We are very racist people across the board. And I think all our stories also show us that instead of pitching ethnicity against each other or ethnicity against nationalism, what we should have done was bring ethnic identities into the umbrella of nationalism, because our social codes around what is respected, what counts as disrespect, what is honorable, what is wrong, what is right, all ethnic groups largely share a similar set of values. And I think agar aapki values same ho, nothing's really stopping you from you know, building things together and finding a way forward together and take everyone with you. But I feel like modern media is doing a disservice. And I would really like to see more media centered around folklore, because the more folklore you look into, you realize we're not that different from each other, despite the fact that we're very unique and we have some very beautiful practices, uh, all of us as communities.
Thank you so much. Saba, we have the next question is for Saba. As an artist and educator, as well as a performer of public art in a sense, where do you see the role of art in shaping post-colonial narratives in the broad public sphere? Art can be exclusionary and a privilege to some. Does your work risk being lost in translation? Or have you taken steps towards making art accessible to the public? And speaking on accessibility, you mentioned infrastructural sites have become much more restricted in recent years. Why do you think this is happening?
Yeah, so one of the projects was held in Lahore Biennale. So that was like a public project, public exhibition, and it was free and open to public. So, and to the extent that people were also allowed to touch the artworks, because there was a lot of holding phones and headphones, looking at screens. And whenever I would come back, there would be fingerprints all over the installation. But I didn't mind that, and that was the whole point of it, to not remove the audience. And otherwise, people don't even know about this research. A lot of it is very dry to read. People don't even know where these barrages are. So at least this is the way for people to access it. And it's not like my videos are in English and people can't understand it. But unfortunately, there are not that many venues in Pakistan who are interested in such big projects. So yes, that's a problem where I can't show it in many places. And I don't know who would be interested in funding or showcasing them. But I think they're very accessible. If you look at the videos, it doesn't have any art jargon. They're very simple videos. Coming to the accessibility, I think now that we have the change in regime, I find it very difficult to enter the sites, because I was trying to get access to Mangla Dam again, and it was just next to impossible. And luckily, I found local filmmakers to make drone footage for me of the reservoir, because in January the reservoir goes at dead level, and all the older houses and buildings, they come up, which were drowned in the waters. So I was able to get that just before the war. And this time the water, it was so dry that it stayed dry till May. Usually it's only till I think February or April. So I was very lucky that way, but I could not get permissions to go back to Mangla Dam. And I think with so much paranoia these days, these things have really closed up.
Can I just make one comment? Am I allowed to do that?
Yes,
Marvi?
of course, please.
Yeah. Okay. There are a couple of comments one from Aisha Kaisar and one from Subhana Fatima. Aisha was on the question of bylaws. I just wanted to clarify one thing. Bylaws, like all laws, will only tell you what you can't do, which will harm the environment or the infrastructure or people's rights and privileges. Bylaws don't tell you what to do. They tell you what not to do. And the other one, thank you, Subhana, for telling me about the architect of the National Museum, Kodzian. I didn't know that. Kodzian has done a few great houses in Karachi in the 60s and 70s, yeah. But I didn't know he was the architect for the National Museum. Thanks for that.
We have another question for Saba. What do you focus on when collecting the objects to create the sculptures displayed on Sharjah Biennale? What narrative do these sculptures forms create combined?
So we were also collecting a lot of objects on our way. So for example, when we went to the site, I'm forgetting Brahmanabad. We went to Brahmanabad, and it's a huge site which is almost like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, but it hasn't been preserved so well. And you can really pick up anything that you like. And the purpose of it was like to show people that you can really pick up ancient bricks and also export it to Sharjah, and nobody is going to care. So we picked up there were 4 bricks which were there, and there was this little pot with bones in it. So those things went along with the installation. And in some of it, we were collecting, another collective member was collecting dust in each of the spaces. In each barrage, there were like rocks and dust would represent that space. And and we were also collecting rice. So the farmers that I met, he was describing different seed, like rice varieties. So he was mentioning red rice, and I got somebody to find them for me, and that was also part of it. And and the tiles were made in Harappa. Those were new.
Thank you so much, Saba. Thank you so much, Husnain Saab. Now I would like to request Samil, our co-curator, to please conclude the successful session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Samil.
Thank you so much, Sana, for introducing me. And I'm very happy with the session and the talks that we got to have today, from Husnain Lotia's reflection upon the urban landscape of Karachi in the post-independence time period, to Seher and Veera's generous contribution of URA's archive and showing us the artworks of students and how they are reflecting back on Karachi, to Saba Khan's journey of Marvi residency and Pakistan Khawateen Painting Club, and following the water and the changing ecologies and how it is impacting people, to Komal Salman's design archives and the very detailed timeline of development of the aesthetic development of design in Pakistan and what it means to have a design archive in the post-colonial era. All of these conversations are very enriching, and I hope we continue to have this conversation and move this topic forward. We also have a new session on Friday, which is about the metamorphosis of past and how the architecture and communal memory is evolving in post-colonial landscape. So please tune in for that as well. And thank you so much for being here on a weekday. And also a big thanks to Marvi, our founder, and the team of Plus 91, which made the conversation and this conference happen. Thank you so much. And with this, we will say a goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chalo ji, ho gaya.